FIRE, financial independence,
Retire early.
where you put a chunk of your income into investments to one day live off of.
Does it work? Is it even worth it? And is it realistic for the average Canadian? Let's talk about it.
New financial movement being embraced by millennials. It's called FIRE, and FIRE stands for
Early retirement is indeed possible, and they are not alone.
Legally, in order to retire young.
The average American saves a little more than 8% of their annual income after taxes, but FIRE followers are trying to save 50 to 70%. For Canadians, Stats Can found that in 2018, the average household was saving about $1,100, and by 2020, this only increased 1.7%.
With FIRE, you need 25 times your annual expenses invested into assets. From our research, we found that they used a baseline of about $50,000 per year. This means if it costs you $50,000 to live per year, multiplied by 25, you would need $1 million invested into assets to successfully live off FIRE. So let's start there. Is $50,000 realistic for Canadians to live off? The 2019 Canadian census found that the average Canadian household spends about $69,000 per year. This includes your mortgage, transportation, groceries, clothing, etc. And for example, if we take a look at the average couple in Toronto in 2021, we found that they spend about $3,740 per month on necessities, which is equivalent to about $45,000 a year.
So for the sake of this video, we're gonna use two customer personas, Nalia, the new grad, and then Jamal and Emma, who are both six-figure earners. So Nalia has paid off her student debt, she has no goals of home ownership, and she's really trying to keep it as lean as possible since she's really inspired by the FIRE movement. So we're gonna put her around $30,000 in annual expenses, just a little bit below average. Then we have Jamal and Emma, who are both making 100K salaries, and their combined annual expenses are around $70,000. So if we look at their FIRE number, Nalia needs $750,000 invested, and Jamal and Emma need a combined $1.75 million.
Now let's take a look at the other side of the equation, income. Nalia is a new grad and has an entry-level job making about $45,000 a year. After she pays her income tax, she takes home about $36,000 a year, and after paying $30,000 in her expenses, she is left with $6,000 that she's able to invest into her FIRE number. Now I know $6,000 does not sound like a lot, it represents 17% of her income, but keep in mind that is still 5 times over the national average in Canada. If Nalia starts her FIRE journey at 24 years old and invests 17% of her income, she will be able to reach her FIRE number by the age of 52 years old. So much for early retirement. Having a look at Jamal and Emma, they are two mid-level managers making $200,000 total. After tax, their take home is $144,000 with annual expenses of $70,000. This means they're able to invest 51% of their income towards their FIRE number. They will be retired by the age of 40.
So if all of our pals were able to cut their expenses by 25%, Nalia would hit her new FIRE number by 42, and Jamal and Emma would hit theirs by 37.
But is that realistic? That would mean Nalia would have to live off of $22,500, and Jamal and Emma would have to live off of $52,500. Now, this goes to show that high income earners are more geared towards the FIRE movement, and that is one of the major criticisms that we found. A lot of immigrants, people of color, and women have taken to the FIRE movement to build wealth in a world that's not built for them. At the same time, a lot of people noted that the FIRE movement is based off the white man's reality of a high income early on in their career and low expenses relative to others. There's this mindset in the FIRE discussions that you have to cut out everything that's not essential. But what's essential to a white male is very different from what's essential to me. There's a cost to maintaining this afro, she adds. There's a cost to taking care of my skin. You don't have to cut them out to be on the FIRE path. It may take you a little longer, but it's not a competition.
So have any Canadians actually done it? The best example is Christy Shen and Bryce Leung. From 2012 to 2016, they saved 75% of their income to hit that 1 million invested. They quit their tech jobs in Toronto and decided to travel the world instead. Now, what's a little bit hard for me here is they already had $500,000 in savings that they were gonna put towards a down payment when they discovered the FIRE movement instead. I don't know about you, but I do not already have $500,000 saved. Some of the tips that Christy and Bryce offer are looking at really truly finding the highest paying job you possibly can. If you are in a profession that you really love and want to stick with that has a lower income, they suggest trying to move to a different country where you might be able to make around the same income but have greatly reduced expenses.
Which brings us to the question, is it even worth it? Now we know the FIRE community doesn't beat around the bush. It's not an easy path. And as Gary Vee once said,
basically, I want you to eat shit for the next decade.
the FIRE movement is the same opportunity, just no building a business required.
So a few of the questions you have to look at is, do you want to move to another country to cut your expenses? Do you feel like you could stay where you are and cut your expenses in half? And are you willing to do the push to get that higher income, whether it's a raise or starting a new business? Now, these are all questions that you have to answer yourself, but let's weigh some pros and cons together. Let's start with the pros. So the obvious one is that you don't have to work and you can choose how you spend your time. Compounding interest is also a pretty big pro. It's different from just having a lot of savings that you're living off of and chipping away at. With your money invested, your investments and your assets continue to grow. You can also actually still get a job if you want. Whether you want to work through it or come back later and get a job, it's a really great opportunity to double down and be making money in more than one way. With the FIRE movement, you also live a more intentional and minimalistic life, which means you can find more fulfillment outside of your roles and your duties in the workplace and really just get used to who you want to be and what you want to do on this earth.
So let's take a look at the cons of the FIRE movement. The first one is that it may be too much of a life change that you're willing to or able to do. For most, people might not want to move back in with their parents to lower their expenses. You're also banking that history will always repeat itself in the stock market. Nothing in the future is guaranteed. When you think of your FIRE number, typically you're basing that off of your current life. In the future, you might have kids. You may have some major life or health issues come up that isn't always necessarily accounted into your FIRE number. And the lower your income, the harder it is to do. If you are considering joining the FIRE movement, just keep in mind that the leaders in the community specifically choose to live in states or countries that have low to non-existent income taxes and have different lifestyle costs than Canada. In Canada, you can't buy a home for $100,000 like certain areas in the States. And you're definitely not living on an Airbnb on the beach for $30 a day. In Canada, the average income earner pays about 23% in income tax. In states like Florida or Texas, who don't pay income tax, they're already 20% ahead of you in the FIRE game. Now, the standard amount of FIRE to live off of is about $40,000 to $60,000 a year. There have been variations that has evolved through some criticism or some versions where people don't feel like it's attainable or suits them. The first one is lean FIRE. This is someone who lives a more minimal lifestyle and spends less than the average person. This is about $25,000 to $40,000 per year. Next, we have fat FIRE. This is for someone who wants to live off a more lavish lifestyle and typically spends more than the average person. And this is around $100,000 per year. Next, we have barista FIRE. This is where you live off of $25,000 to $50,000 per year, plus working part-time somewhere. The reason for this is you could still have job benefits or possibly supplemental income while you're living in retirement. Lastly, we have coast FIRE. If you aggressively invest early on, you're able to build a nest egg where you can stop contributing, and by the time you reach 60 or 65, you'll be able to live off that money because it's compounded through the years. The key about this one is that you continue working, except you know that you're set for retirement when that time comes.
So what do we think of FIRE? We love the concept behind it, but with a less extreme, less aggressive approach. We take those basic concepts of trying to reduce your expenses as much as possible, investing early and investing often, and trying to make as much money as possible.
Similar to Paula Pant's Evolution of FIRE, we focus on 4 main categories, which are financial basics, traditional investing, real estate, and entrepreneurship.
Goodbye.